Today, President Trump's universal 10% tariff on all imports goes into effect. They're part of his sweeping new tariffs announced this week on nearly all U.S. trading partners, including a 34% tax on imports from China and 20% on the European Union. Now, he says the tariffs are designed to boost domestic manufacturing, but at what cost to Americans and for how long? Joining us now are Michael Busler, an economist and professor of finance at Stockton University, and Javier Palomarez, president and CEO of the U.S. Hispanic Business Council. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Javier, let's start with the basics. So can tariffs result in more things being made in America and create a level playing field with other countries?
Well, you know, there's no doubt that tariffs have worked in the past. In the early 1900s, in fact, tariffs were the primary form of federal taxation. But we're a much different country today. Our economy is much more complicated. There's an interdependency that exists between us and our trading partners. That there is an imbalance, there's no question. I understand the rationale, but tariffs alone cannot be the answer. They have to be paired with investments in technology, investments in manufacturing, investments in innovation, tax rebates and tax incentives for manufacturing, for farmers, and a broad array of industries for this to finally work. Now, I'll admit, and I understand that President Trump himself said there will be pain before the gain. We're in the pain portion of all of this. I'm now wanting to see what's the rationale and what comes next. Where are the incentives? Where's the tax rebates and breaks that the manufacturing, farming, and industrial sectors will get in the United States?
Michael, what do you think? You think there needs to be some more of a balance here, or will these tariffs work as is?
Tariffs are a small part or a part of President Trump's plan. Look, President Trump got into office. He took a look at the tariff situation. I'm a free market economist. I don't like to see tariffs placed on any goods at any time by any country. However, most governments, maybe all governments, have decided there should be some tariff. So years ago, they said, well, we'll put a 2.5% tariff. That should work for everybody. So the U.S. put a 2.5% tariff. The problem was China put a 25% tariff. The European Union, with their cars, they sell them here. We charge 2.5% tariff. They charge a 10% tariff. And then there's a value added tax added on to that. Harley Davidson has a big market for their motorcycles in India. India put a 100% tariff on the motorcycles, forcing India to build a plant there. What these tariffs are designed to do, there's two things. One, you want to level the playing field so that if we have free trade, it has to be fair trade. What Trump is doing with this is really a negotiating tool. President Trump is a business person. He knows that when you're negotiating two things, you want to negotiate from a position of strength and you want to create a sense of urgency so that your partners come to the table. Slaps tariffs on everybody. These countries that depend on selling to the U.S. For their economy to thrive will have to come to the bargaining table and will eventually come up with a plan where everybody has the same tariffs. Now, I agree with Javier. It's got to go along with everything else. So what is Trump going to do? He's worried
Michael,
that there may be an inflation.
Javier did talk about pain earlier, and I want to play a clip from President Trump, because today on Truth Social, he wrote, "Hang tough, it won't be easy, but the end result will be historic." And here's Senator Chuck Schumer on that issue.
Some of the leading banks, the leading financial analysts, with no axe to grind, have greatly increased the odds that we will have a recession because of what Trump is doing. What president walks mindlessly into a recession, which means it's harder to get a job, harder to keep a job, harder to pay the bills?
Now, Michael, I want to come back to you. Trump has said these tariffs are going to bring wealth to America, and you have said that there will be some short-term pain. So do you agree with Senator Schumer that there could be a recession?
Possibly. If there is a recession and GDP declines, unemployment will go up a little bit. So another 2 or 3% of the population will be negatively impacted. But in the long run, we have to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., especially key industries like steel, aluminum, copper, and medical supplies. He's going to keep the tariffs on those products, so it will now be less expensive to produce those products in the U.S. That will attract large investments, and you'll see a rebuilding of the steel industry, the aluminum industry, even the automobile industries. Some of the car companies, Honda was going to build a plant in Mexico. They changed their mind once they heard the tariffs, building in Indiana. Hyundai is going to build a plant here along with a steel plant. Trillions of dollars of
Well, Michael,
investment
you
are
know, you make a lot of good
coming in
points here, but let's see what Javier has to say, because Javier, you talked earlier about some set-offs and some rebates. So do you think we're headed for a recession if we don't do that, if Trump doesn't do that?
I think we are headed for a recession, to the point that the professor just made. And I agree with Michael on many of the points he's made. But the fact of the matter is, I think it's JP Morgan just announced they upped their recession prediction to up to over 60%. That doesn't bode well for the American economy, certainly not for the small business community. You're right now, we're sitting at 25% tariffs on any Mexican or Canadian good. Now, that's our number one and number two trading partner. 10% across the board on any imported goods. 25% tariffs on auto imports. 55% tariffs on Chinese goods. I agree with that. 45% on Vietnam. 30% on Taiwan. 25% on Japan. I think it's the barrage and just the sheer amount of tariffs all at one time. Again, I will agree with the professor that there will be pain. The American economy, the American small business community wants a rationale. We now want to see the balance, the other side of this equation. Where are the incentives? Where are the tax breaks? I think it's important that we not worry so much about protecting the industries of the past and allowing the industries of the future to flourish. And sometimes tariffs, especially in this form, can be very damaging to that flourishing, that growth that the innovative and technological sectors of our economy sorely need right now.
Well, Javier, you talk about a barrage of tariffs, and Trump has said his tariffs worked during his first term. But in terms of their global impact, are these tariffs different from what Trump imposed before, Javier?
Well, I think they're different in the sheer amount of tariffs and just the velocity in which we're seeing these things take place. Again, tariffs have worked in the past, but they will not work by themselves. The real danger here is the fear and the uncertainty, not only of the American economy and American business, but the American family. We are in interdependent, symbiotic relationships that are global, and these kinds of changes kind of remind me of when I was critical of President Biden when he first came into office. You'll recall I said that he was going too far and too fast when it came to his regulation and the pulling back on the traditional oil and energy sector, and we saw what happened then. So I'm hopeful that there was a lesson learned there. I'm hopeful that the Trump administration is very quickly going to follow up with what are the balances to what we're seeing here in terms of all of these tariffs.
Well, Michael, Javier says there are more tariffs now than there were in the first term, but in terms of how they're going to work across the board, what are the differences here?
So here's the thing. So you put a tariff on product, it raises the price of the product. Now it's cheaper to produce it in the U.S. than it is to import these lower price products. Well, aren't you afraid of inflation? So President Trump said, I'm going to vastly increase the supply of energy. And when you increase the supply of energy, the price falls. President Trump very aggressively said that he expects the price of energy to be cut in half by the end of his first year in office. If he's anywhere close to that, that will offset any of inflationary impact of tariffs. And if you really want to help the middle class, make sure everybody has good jobs here. So we'll start building more products, more made in America. People will be proud of made in America products. Our manufacturing sector will grow. He did this in his first term. He put tariffs on China. He ended his term, his 4 years, with an inflation rate of 1.4%. The economy was set to grow before COVID hit, and that's what he's looking for in the future, so that we're not dependent on foreign goods for vital products.
Well, Michael, you know, one thing is certain. Trump's announced tariffs have started conversations at the negotiating table. Javier Palomarez, president of the U.S. Hispanic Business Council, and economist Michael Busler, thank you both so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you.